Widow finds husband's secret diary. The last page reveals a love that transcends death. Hello. Welcome. Leave a like, subscribe, activate notifications, and enjoy this story. When Amelia discovers her late husband's hidden diary, she uncovers a world of lucid dreaming that blurs the line between life and death. As she delves deeper into his mysterious research, she realizes that saying goodbye might just be the beginning of an extraordinary journey. The soft glow of the bedside lamp cast long shadows across the room as Amelia Thornton sat on the edge of the bed she once shared with her husband, Mark. Her trembling fingers traced the worn leather cover of a book she had never seen before. It had been exactly 1 month since Mark's sudden death, and the pain of his absence still felt as raw as the day he'd left her. Amelia's honey-brown eyes, rimmed with dark circles from sleepless nights, fixated on the diary in her hands. She had discovered it earlier that evening while finally mustering the courage to sort through Mark's belongings. It had been tucked away in the false bottom of his old oak desk drawer, a secret hiding place she never knew existed in their 10 years of marriage. The 32-year-old widow brushed a strand of her chestnut hair behind her ear, her wedding ring catching the light as she did so. The house around her felt cavernous and empty, a stark contrast to the warmth and laughter that had filled it just weeks ago. Now, the silence was broken only by the soft ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway, a wedding gift from Mark's parents that suddenly seemed to mock the passage of time. With a deep breath, Amelia opened the diary. The familiar scent of Mark's favorite sandalwood cologne wafted up from the pages, bringing tears to her eyes. His neat, precise handwriting filled the pages, each entry dated meticulously. As she began to read, her heart raced with a mixture of anticipation and dread. August 15, 2023. Today marks the beginning of something extraordinary. Dr. Eliza Chun approached me after my lecture on cognitive neuroscience. Her proposal is incredible, almost unbelievable. A research project on lucid dreaming that could revolutionize our understanding of consciousness. I've agreed to participate as a test subject. Amelia doesn't need to know. It's just a harmless study after all. Amelia's brow furrowed. She had no idea Mark had been involved in any research outside of his regular university work. As she continued reading, the entries became more detailed, describing vivid dreams and increasingly complex experiments. October 3, 2023. The dreams are becoming more intense. Last night, I found myself in a vast library that seemed to contain all the knowledge in the universe. Dr. Chun says this is a common archetype in lucid dreams, but it felt so real. I could smell the old books, feel the texture of the pages. When I woke up, I felt like I had lost something precious. As Amelia turned the pages, her confusion grew. Mark had always been passionate about his work in neuroscience, but this seemed different. The way he described these dreams was unlike anything she had ever heard from him before. It was as if he had discovered a whole new world, one that he had chosen to keep hidden from her. The clock in the hallway chimed midnight, startling Amelia. She realized she had been reading for hours, completely engrossed in Mark's secret life. Her eyes burned with fatigue, but she couldn't bring herself to stop. She needed to understand why her husband had kept this from her, why he had chosen to embark on this strange journey alone. As she neared the end of the diary, the entries became more frantic, filled with excitement and a sense of urgency that made Amelia's heart race. January 28, 2024, we're close to a breakthrough. Dr. Chun believes we've found a way to not just control our dreams, but to use them as a gateway to something more. The implications are staggering. If we're right, we could be on the verge of discovering a way to transcend the boundaries of life and death itself. Amelia's hands shook as she turned to the final page. Mark's last entry was dated just 2 days before his death. The handwriting was rushed, almost feverish in its intensity. February 12, 2024. This is it, the culmination of all our work. I've written down the full procedure for the final experiment. If anything happens to me, Amelia, my love, this is for you. Follow these steps exactly, and you'll understand everything. I'm sorry for keeping this from you, but I promise, it was all for us. Always for us. Below the entry was a detailed set of instructions, a bizarre ritual involving meditation techniques, specific sound frequencies, and what appeared to be a recipe for some kind of herbal tea. At the bottom of the page, in bold letters, Mark had written, "Remember, the dream is the key. Find me there." Amelia closed the diary, her mind reeling. The silence of the house suddenly felt oppressive, charged with the weight of this newfound knowledge. She looked at the empty space beside her on the bed, where Mark should have been, and made a decision. With trembling hands, she reached for her phone and searched for Dr. Eliza Chen's contact information. As the phone rang, Amelia's heart pounded in her chest. She didn't know what she was getting into, but she knew one thing for certain. She would follow this path wherever it led. If there was even the slightest chance of understanding Mark's last message, of saying the goodbye she never got to say, she had to try. The line clicked as someone picked up. "Dr. Chun speaking." A crisp, professional voice answered. Amelia took a deep breath. "Dr. Chun, my name is Amelia Thornton. I'm Mark Thornton's wife. We need to talk about your research." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Finally, Dr. Chun spoke, her voice now tinged with a mix of surprise and what sounded like fear. "Mrs. Thornton, I'm so sorry for your loss, but I'm afraid I don't know what you're talking about." "Please," Amelia said, her voice cracking with emotion. "I found Mark's diary. I know about the experiments, the lucid dreaming. I need to understand what happened to my husband." Another pause, longer this time. When Dr. Chun spoke again, her voice was low and urgent. "Mrs. Thornton, listen to me carefully. What Mark was involved in, it's not safe. You need to forget about this. For your own good, please, just let it go." But Amelia's resolve only strengthened. "I can't do that, Dr. Chen. Mark left me a message, instructions. He wanted me to continue his work. I need your help to understand what he was doing." The silence on the other end of the line seemed to stretch for an eternity. Finally, Dr. Chun sighed heavily. "Very well, Mrs. Thornton, but I warn you, once you step down this path, there's no turning back. Meet me tomorrow at noon at the Riverside Cafe. Come alone and bring the diary." As Amelia hung up the phone, a mix of excitement and trepidation coursed through her veins. She looked at Mark's diary, lying innocently on the bedside table, and felt as if she were standing on the precipice of something vast and unknown. Whatever secrets lay hidden in those pages, whatever Mark had discovered in his dreams, Amelia was determined to uncover the truth. She lay back on the bed, clutching Mark's pillow to her chest, inhaling the fading scent of him. As she drifted off to sleep, her last conscious thought was a silent promise to her husband. "I'll find you, Mark. Whatever it takes, I'll find you." Little did Amelia know that her decision to pursue Mark's research would plunge her into a world where dreams and reality intertwine, where the boundaries between life and death blur, and where love might indeed prove stronger than the grave itself. As she slept, the first tendrils of an extraordinary dream began to take shape in her mind, setting in motion a chain of events that would change her life forever. The Riverside Cafe buzzed with the gentle hum of lunchtime conversation, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee mingling with the sweet scent of pastries. Amelia sat at a corner table, her fingers drumming nervously on the worn cover of Mark's diary. She had arrived early, her anticipation making it impossible to sit still at home. As the ornate clock on the cafe wall struck noon, the door chimed, and a petite woman with sharp features and jet black hair pulled into a tight bun entered. Her eyes, dark and intense, scanned the room before landing on Amelia. Without hesitation, she strode over to the table. "Mrs. Thornton?" she asked, her voice low and controlled. Amelia nodded, gesturing to the empty chair across from her. "Dr. Chan, I presume?" The woman sat down, her movements precise and deliberate. Up close, Amelia could see the lines of stress etched around her eyes and mouth. Dr. Chun looked like someone who hadn't slept well in a very long time. "I must admit, I had hoped never to have this conversation," Dr. Chun began, her eyes flicking to the diary on the table. "What Mark and I were working on, it was never meant to go this far." Amelia leaned forward, her voice barely above a whisper. What exactly were you working on, Dr. Chun? Mark's diary. The things he wrote about, they seem impossible. Dr. Chen's lips thinned into a tight line. She glanced around the cafe, as if checking for eavesdroppers, before speaking. Mrs. Thornton, what I'm about to tell you will sound crazy, but I need you to listen with an open mind. Can you do that? Amelia nodded, her heart racing. For years, I've been studying the nature of consciousness, particularly in the realm of lucid dreaming. But about a year ago, I stumbled upon something unexpected. A method to not just control dreams, but to use them as a gateway to access different planes of existence. Amelia's eyes widened. Different planes? You mean like other worlds? Dr. Chun shook her head. Not exactly. More like different levels of reality. The conscious world we inhabit is just one layer. Through our research, we discovered that there are deeper layers, realms where the rules of physics as we know them don't apply, where thought becomes reality, and where, theoretically, one could transcend the limitations of the physical body. Amelia's mind reeled, trying to process this information. It sounded like something out of a science fiction novel, and yet, the earnestness in Dr. Chen's eyes made it hard to dismiss outright. And Mark? Amelia asked, her voice trembling. What happened to him? Dr. Chen's face fell, a shadow of guilt passing over her features. Mark was our most gifted subject. He had a natural ability to navigate these dream realms. But in our last experiment, something went wrong. He went deeper than we ever had before, and then she trailed off, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. And then what? Amelia pressed, her heart in her throat. He didn't wake up, Dr. Chun whispered. At least not in the conventional sense. His body, it just stopped functioning. But his brain activity, Mrs. Thornton, I've never seen anything like it. It was as if his consciousness had detached from his physical form. Amelia felt as if the ground had dropped out from beneath her. Are you saying Mark is still alive? Just trapped in some kind of dream world? Dr. Chun hesitated, choosing her words carefully. I'm saying that the line between life and death might be more blurred than we ever imagined. And that Mark, wherever he is, he might not be as gone as we think. A wild hope blossomed in Amelia's chest, tempered by a creeping fear. The instructions he left in his diary. Is that how I can reach him? Dr. Chen's eyes widened in alarm. Mrs. Thornton, you can't possibly be considering. I have to, Amelia interrupted, her voice firm with resolve. If there's even a chance that I can reach Mark, that I can bring him back, I have to try. Dr. Chun leaned back in her chair, conflict evident on her face. After a long moment, she spoke, her voice heavy with resignation. I can't stop you, but I can warn you. The realms Mark accessed, they're not just dreams. They're real in a way we don't fully understand. And they're dangerous. If you go in unprepared, you might never find your way back. Amelia met Dr. Chen's gaze, her determination unwavering. Then prepare me. Teach me what I need to know. Dr. Chun studied Amelia for a long moment, as if weighing her resolve. Finally, she nodded. Very well, but not here. Meet me tonight at this address. She scribbled something on a napkin and slid it across the table. And Mrs. Thornton? Don't tell anyone about this. Not your family, not your friends. What we're about to do, it's beyond the realm of conventional science. If the wrong people found out, she left the thought unfinished, but Amelia understood. Whatever they were dealing with, it was bigger than she had imagined. As Dr. Chun stood to leave, Amelia caught her arm. Dr. Chen, one last thing. In his diary, Mark mentioned a tea. Is that part of the process? A flicker of surprise passed over Dr. Chen's face. The tea? Yes, it's a crucial component. A blend of herbs that helps induce the right state of consciousness. But Mrs. Thornton, please, don't try anything on your own. The risks are too great. With that, Dr. Chun left, the bell above the door chiming her departure. Amelia sat alone at the table, her mind swirling with possibilities and dangers. She looked down at Mark's diary, running her fingers over the cover. Inside these pages lay the key to finding her husband, to understanding the mystery of his disappearance. As she gathered her things to leave, Amelia caught sight of her reflection in the cafe window. The woman staring back at her looked different somehow, eyes bright with purpose, shoulders set with determination. She was no longer just a grieving widow. She was a woman on a mission. Walking out into the bright afternoon sunlight, Amelia felt as if she were stepping into a new world. The ordinary bustle of the city around her seemed surreal, a thin veneer over a deeper, more complex reality. As she made her way home, her mind raced with questions and possibilities. What would she find in the dream realms? Was Mark really out there, waiting for her? And if she found him, could she bring him back? One thing was certain. Amelia Thornton's life would never be the same again. As she clutched the diary to her chest, she silently renewed her vow to Mark. "I'm coming for you," she whispered. "No matter what it takes, I'll find you." Little did she know that her journey into the world of lucid dreaming would test not only her love for Mark, but also her understanding of reality itself. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the city streets, Amelia prepared herself for a night that would change everything. The address Dr. Chun had given Amelia led to an unassuming brownstone in a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood. As night fell, casting long shadows across the street, Amelia found herself standing before the weathered front door, her heart pounding with a mixture of anticipation and fear. She raised her hand to knock, but before her knuckles could make contact, the door swung open. Dr. Chun stood in the entryway, her face illuminated by the soft glow of candles from within. "Come in quickly," she said, ushering Amelia inside. "We don't have much time." The interior of the house was a stark contrast to its ordinary exterior. The living room had been transformed into something resembling a cross between a laboratory and a meditation retreat. Strange machines with blinking lights and tangled wires occupied one corner, while the center of the room was dominated by a circle of cushions surrounding a low table. On the table sat an ornate teapot, steam rising gently from its spout, filling the air with an exotic, herbal aroma. Next to it lay a device that looked like a high-tech sleep mask, covered in small electrodes and tiny blinking lights. "Mrs. Thornton," Dr. Chun began, gesturing for Amelia to take a seat on one of the cushions. "Before we proceed, I need you to understand the gravity of what we're about to attempt. The realms we're dealing with, they're not just dreams. They're alternate states of consciousness, maybe even alternate realities. The dangers are very real." Amelia nodded, her eyes fixed on the steaming teapot. "I understand, but I have to try. For Mark." Dr. Chun sat across from Amelia, her eyes intense in the flickering candlelight. "The tea you see before you is a special blend, designed to help induce the proper state of consciousness. It contains a mixture of herbs known for their ability to enhance lucid dreaming, mugwort, blue lotus, and others. But the key ingredient is something far rarer." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small vial filled with a shimmering, iridescent powder. "This is extracted from a fungus found only in the deepest caves of the Amazon. The indigenous people there have used it for centuries to communicate with their ancestors. It's what allows us to push beyond normal lucid dreaming into something else." Amelia watched, transfixed, as Dr. Chun added a pinch of the powder to the tea. The liquid swirled, taking on an otherworldly glow. "Once you drink this," Dr. Chun continued, "you'll enter a dream state unlike anything you've experienced before. The device next to you will monitor your brain waves and help stabilize the connection. But from there, you're on your own." She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Remember, Amelia, no matter what you see or experience, it's crucial that you maintain your sense of self. The dream realms can be seductive. It's easy to lose yourself. If that happens, you may never find your way back." Amelia nodded, her throat tight with emotion. "I understand, but how will I find Mark?" Dr. Chen's expression grew thoughtful. "The dream realms respond to intention and emotion. Your connection to Mark, your love for him, that will be your guide. But be warned, you may encounter aspects of Mark or yourself that you never knew existed. The subconscious mind is a complex place. With trembling hands, Amelia reached for the teacup. The liquid inside seemed to pulse with an inner light. She raised it to her lips, hesitating for just a moment. "For Mark," she whispered, and drank deeply. The effect was almost instantaneous. The room around her began to blur and shift, colors bleeding into one another. She felt Dr. Chun guiding her to lie down, placing the sleep mask over her eyes. And then, Amelia found herself standing in a vast, empty space. Mist swirled around her feet, and in the distance, she could see shapes forming and dissolving like half-remembered dreams. "Mark?" she called out, her voice echoing strangely in the void. "Mark, are you here?" As if in response to her call, the mist began to coalesce, forming into a familiar shape. Amelia's heart leapt as she recognized Mark's silhouette. But as she rushed towards him, the figure dissolved, reforming into a door standing alone in the emptiness. Instinctively, Amelia knew this was her path forward. With a deep breath, she reached out and turned the handle, stepping through into the unknown. On the other side, she found herself in a library that seemed to stretch on forever. Books floated through the air, their pages fluttering like birds' wings. And there, seated at a desk piled high with ancient tomes, was Mark. He looked up as she approached, his face lighting up with recognition. "Amelia? Is it really you?" Tears of joy streamed down Amelia's face as she rushed towards him. But just as she was about to embrace him, she remembered Dr. Chen's warning. This might not be the real Mark, but a projection of her subconscious. "Mark," she said, her voice trembling, "I've come to bring you home. Do you remember what happened? Do you know where you are?" Mark's expression clouded with confusion. "Home? But Amelia, I am home. This library, it contains all the knowledge in the universe. Why would I ever want to leave?" Amelia felt a chill run down her spine. This wasn't the Mark she knew. Her Mark would never choose knowledge over their life together. She realized with a sinking heart that her journey was far from over. "Mark, please," she pleaded. "Try to remember. This isn't real. We have a life together, waiting for us." But even as she spoke, the library around them began to shift and change. Books flew from their shelves, swirling around them in a dizzying vortex. Mark's form began to flicker and fade. "I'm sorry, Amelia," his voice echoed as he disappeared. "But I can't go back. Not yet. There's still so much to learn." And then Amelia was alone again, the library dissolving into mist around her. She fell to her knees, overwhelmed by the enormity of the task before her. How could she convince Mark to return when he didn't even seem to remember their life together? As she knelt there, trying to gather her thoughts, she felt a gentle touch on her shoulder. She looked up to see a figure that took her breath away. It was herself, but older, with streaks of gray in her hair and lines of wisdom around her eyes. "Don't give up," her older self said, her voice filled with compassion. "The journey is just beginning. Mark is out there, lost in the vastness of his own mind. It's up to you to remind him of who he really is, of the love you share." Amelia stood, wiping away her tears and squaring her shoulders. "But how?" she asked. "How do I find the real Mark in all of this?" Her older self smiled, a knowing twinkle in her eye. "By remembering who you are, Amelia. Your love for Mark is your anchor, your guide. Follow it and you'll find your way." With those words, the figure faded away, leaving Amelia alone once more. But now a new determination filled her. She closed her eyes, focusing on her memories of Mark, their first date, their wedding day, quiet moments of laughter and love. As she concentrated, she felt a pull, like an invisible thread tugging at her heart. Opening her eyes, she saw a path forming in the mist before her, leading off into the unknown. Taking a deep breath, Amelia set off down the path. She didn't know what challenges lay ahead, what strange dreamscapes she would have to navigate. But she knew one thing for certain: she would find Mark, and she would bring him home. As she walked, the mist around her began to take on new shapes, forming into scenes from their life together. But mixed in were glimpses of places she didn't recognize, fragments of Mark's dreams and memories. She realized that to find the real Mark, she would have to navigate not just her own subconscious, but his as well. The path stretched on before her, winding through an ever-changing landscape of memory and dream, and somewhere out there, lost in the vastness of his own mind, Mark was waiting to be found. Amelia squared her shoulders and pressed on, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Her quest to bring Mark back had only just begun. The dreamscape shifted around Amelia like a kaleidoscope, memories and fantasies blending into a surreal tapestry. She found herself walking through a series of doors, each one opening into a new scene from Mark's life, some familiar, others completely unknown to her. One door led to Mark's childhood home, where a young version of her husband sat at a kitchen table, poring over a book on neuroscience. Another opened into a vast lecture hall, where Mark stood at the podium, his eyes alight with passion as he spoke about the mysteries of the human mind. As Amelia moved through these fragments of Mark's past and imagination, she began to piece together a picture of the man she thought she knew so well. She saw his triumphs and his struggles, his dreams and his fears, all laid bare in this strange dream world. But still, she couldn't find the real Mark, the man she had married, the one she was desperately trying to bring home. Just as frustration threatened to overwhelm her, Amelia found herself in a familiar setting, their backyard on a warm summer evening. Fireflies danced in the air, and the scent of blooming jasmine filled her senses. And there, sitting on the old wooden swing they had built together, was Mark. Her heart leaped at the sight of him, but she approached cautiously, remembering her earlier encounter in the library. "Mark," she called softly. He turned to her, his eyes lighting up with recognition. "Amelia, is it really you this time?" She sat down beside him on the swing, her hand reaching for his almost involuntarily. To her relief, he felt solid and real. "It's me, Mark. I've come to bring you home." Mark's brow furrowed in confusion. "Home? But Amelia, I don't understand. Where are we? The last thing I remember is the experiment with Dr. Chan, and then everything became so strange." Amelia's heart raced. This seemed more like the real Mark than any version she had encountered so far. "Mark, listen to me. You're trapped in some kind of dream state. The experiment, something went wrong. Your body in the real world, it's..." She couldn't bring herself to say the word, "dead." Mark's eyes widened with shock and disbelief. "But that's impossible. I feel so alive here. Everything is so vivid, so real." He gestured to the world around them. "I can create anything I can imagine. I've explored the depths of the ocean and the far reaches of space. How can this be just a dream?" Amelia felt tears welling up in her eyes. "I know it feels real, Mark, but it's not. Our life together, our home, our friends and family, that's what's real. And we need you back." Mark stood up abruptly, pacing in front of the swing. "But Amelia, don't you see? This could be the greatest scientific discovery of all time. A realm where consciousness exists independently of the body. Think of the implications." Amelia's heart sank. Even now, faced with the truth, part of Mark was still the scientist, more concerned with discovery than with returning home. She realized that simply telling him the truth wouldn't be enough. She needed to remind him of what he was leaving behind. Standing up, she took Mark's hands in hers. "I understand the importance of your work, Mark. I always have. But there's something more important than any scientific discovery." She closed her eyes, concentrating hard. The dreamscape around them began to shift, transforming into a series of vivid memories. Their first date at the little Italian restaurant downtown. The day Mark proposed on a hilltop overlooking the city. Their wedding day, surrounded by friends and family. Quiet evenings at home, talking and laughing. The life they had built together, filled with love and shared dreams. As the memories played out around them, Amelia saw tears forming in Mark's eyes. I had almost forgotten," he whispered. "How could I forget all of this?" Amelia squeezed his hands tightly. "This is what's real, Mark. This is what's waiting for you back home." Not just me, but all the people who love you, all the dreams we still have to fulfill together. Mark pulled her into a tight embrace, his body shaking with emotion. I want to come home, Amelia, but I don't know how. I've been lost in this dream for so long. I'm not sure I remember the way back. As he spoke, the dreamscape around them began to flicker and distort. Amelia could feel a pull, as if something was trying to drag her away from Mark. No, she cried, clinging to him tightly. I won't lose you again. But the force was too strong. As the world dissolved around them, Amelia heard Mark's voice, fading into the distance. Find me, Amelia. Follow the sound of my voice. And then she was falling, tumbling through a whirlwind of colors and shapes, Mark's voice echoing in her ears. With a gasp, Amelia's eyes flew open. She was back in Dr. Chen's living room, the sleep mask askew on her face. Dr. Chen was leaning over her, concern etched on her features. Mrs. Thornton? Amelia? Are you all right? Amelia sat up slowly, her head spinning. I found him, Dr. Chen. I found Mark, but I couldn't bring him back. Not yet. Dr. Chen helped her to a sitting position, offering her a glass of water. What happened? What did you see? As Amelia recounted her experience, Dr. Chen listened intently, her expression growing more and more excited. This is extraordinary, she murmured. You've made contact. It's more than we ever achieved in our experiments. Amelia set down the glass, her determination renewed. I need to go back in. Mark is lost, but he wants to come home. I just need to find a way to guide him back. Dr. Chen shook her head. Not tonight. The process is too draining. You need to rest to process what you've experienced. We can try again tomorrow night. Amelia wanted to protest, but she could feel exhaustion seeping into her bones. Reluctantly, she nodded. All right, but first thing tomorrow we start preparing. I'm not giving up until I bring Mark home. As she left Dr. Chen's house, stepping out into the cool night air, Amelia felt a mix of hope and frustration. She was closer to Mark than she had been since his death, but he still felt so far away. As she walked home, her mind raced with questions and possibilities. How could she help Mark find his way back? What other challenges would she face in the dream realms? And perhaps most troublingly, what if part of Mark didn't want to come back at all? Amelia shook her head, pushing away the doubts. She had made a promise to herself and to Mark. No matter what it took, she would find a way to bring him home. As she climbed into bed that night, her last thought before drifting off to sleep was of Mark's voice, calling out to her across the vast expanse of the dream world. I'm coming, Mark, she whispered into the darkness. Just hold on. I'm coming. The following evening found Amelia once again seated in Dr. Chen's living room, her hands wrapped around a steaming cup of the special tea. The events of the previous night's dream journey had left her both exhilarated and exhausted, but her determination had only grown stronger. Dr. Chen sat across from her, her face grave. Amelia, before we begin, there's something you need to understand. The deeper you go into these dream realms, the greater the risk becomes. Not just to your mind, but to your very sense of self. Amelia nodded, her jaw set with determination. I understand the risks, Dr. Chen, but I have to try. Mark is out there, lost and confused. I'm the only one who can bring him back. Dr. Chen sighed, recognizing the futility of trying to dissuade her. Very well, but remember, no matter what you encounter, no matter how real it seems, you must hold onto your core self, your memories, your love for Mark. These are your anchors to reality. As Amelia drank the tea and settled back onto the cushions, the sleep mask lowering over her eyes, she focused on Dr. Chen's words. She thought of her life with Mark, of the future they had planned together. These memories would be her guide, her lifeline in the chaotic world of dreams. The familiar sensation of falling enveloped her, and when she opened her eyes, Amelia found herself in a vast, open field. The sky above was a swirling mass of colors, like the inside of a kaleidoscope. In the distance, she could see structures floating in the air, fragments of buildings, bridges to nowhere, staircases that twisted in impossible ways. "Mark!" she called out, her voice echoing strangely in the dreamscape. "Mark, can you hear me?" For a moment there was silence. Then, carried on a breeze that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, she heard Mark's voice. "Amelia? Help me! I'm lost!" Amelia's heart raced. She spun around, trying to determine the direction of the voice, but it seemed to be coming from all around her. "Mark, keep talking. I'll find you." She began to run across the field, the landscape shifting and changing with each step. The grass beneath her feet turned to sand, then to water, then to a surface that looked like glass but felt like clouds. All the while, Mark's voice continued to call out, sometimes clear, sometimes fading to a whisper. As she ran, Amelia encountered fragments of memories and dreams, some hers, some Mark's, and some she couldn't identify. She saw doors floating in midair, windows that looked out onto impossible landscapes, and mirrors that reflected versions of herself she didn't recognize. Finally, she found herself in front of a massive maze, its walls shimmering and shifting like mirages in the desert. Mark's voice was clearer now, coming from somewhere within the labyrinth. "Amelia, I'm in here, but I can't find my way out." Taking a deep breath, Amelia plunged into the maze. The walls seemed to move around her, paths appearing and disappearing without warning. She encountered dead ends that turned into new corridors, staircases that led to nowhere, and rooms that defied the laws of physics. Throughout it all, she kept Mark's voice as her guide, following the sound of his calls. As she navigated the ever-changing labyrinth, Amelia began to realize that the maze was more than just a physical challenge. It was a representation of Mark's confused state of mind, his memories and thoughts tangled and disorganized. Finally, after what felt like hours of searching, Amelia turned a corner and saw Mark. He was standing in the center of a circular room, surrounded by floating screens showing snippets of his life, his research, his dreams, his fears. "Mark!" Amelia cried out, rushing towards him. He turned, relief flooding his face. "Amelia, you found me!" As they embraced, the maze around them began to crumble, dissolving into mist. They found themselves standing in a vast, empty space, reminiscent of where Amelia had first entered the dream world. "Mark," Amelia said urgently, holding his face in her hands, "we need to go home. Do you remember the way?" Mark's brow furrowed in concentration. I think so. But Amelia, there's something holding me back. A part of me that doesn't want to leave." As he spoke, a shadow seemed to detach itself from Mark, taking on a form of its own, a darker, more intense version of Mark, his eyes gleaming with an almost manic light. "We can't leave," the shadow Mark exclaimed. "There's still so much to discover, so much to learn." Amelia felt a chill run down her spine. She realized that this was the part of Mark that had been seduced by the limitless possibilities of the dream world, the part that had kept him trapped here. "Mark," she said softly, addressing both versions of her husband, "I know the allure of discovery. It's part of why I fell in love with you. But there's a whole world waiting for us back home. Real discoveries to be made, real lives to be lived." The real Mark nodded slowly, his resolve strengthening. "She's right," he said to his shadow self. "We've learned so much, but it's time to go back, to use what we've learned to help others." The shadow Mark seemed to waver, its form becoming less distinct. "But the knowledge, the power, we'll take it with us," Amelia said firmly. "But not at the cost of our real lives, our love." As she spoke, she felt a tugging sensation, as if something was trying to pull her back to the waking world. She grabbed Mark's hand tightly. "It's time to go. Are you ready?" Mark nodded, squeezing her hand. As the shadow Mark faded away, merging back into the real Mark, they both closed their eyes, focusing on their shared memories of home. The dreamscape around them began to dissolve, replaced by a warm, golden light. Amelia could hear Dr. Chen's voice, distant at first but growing clearer, calling them back. With a gasp, Amelia's eyes flew open. She was back in Dr. Chen's living room, the sleep mask sliding off her face. But this time she wasn't alone. Beside her, still holding her hand, Mark was stirring, his eyes fluttering open. "Mark!" Amelia cried out, tears of joy streaming down her face. Dr. Chun rushed over, her face a mix of shock and elation. "It's impossible," she whispered. "You've done it. You've brought him back." As Mark slowly sat up, looking around in confusion, Amelia pulled him into a tight embrace. "Welcome home," she whispered, but even as joy flooded through her, Amelia couldn't shake a lingering sense of unease. They had conquered the dream world, but what consequences would their journey have in the waking world? And was Mark truly free of the allure of that other realm? As Dr. Chun began to examine Mark, checking his vital signs and asking him questions, Amelia knew that their ordeal was far from over. They had won a battle, but the war between reality and dreams, between the known and the unknown, was just beginning. The days following Mark's return were a whirlwind of emotions and challenges. While Amelia was overjoyed to have her husband back, it quickly became apparent that reintegrating into the real world would not be a simple task for Mark. At first, Mark struggled with the most basic aspects of daily life. He would stare in wonder at ordinary objects, as if seeing them for the first time. Simple tasks like eating or getting dressed seemed to confuse him. Amelia often found him trying to manipulate reality as he had in the dream world, reaching out to change things with his mind. "I'm sorry," he would say, frustration evident in his voice. "Everything feels so limited here, so fixed." Amelia did her best to be patient, to guide Mark back into the rhythms of everyday life. But she couldn't shake the feeling that a part of him was still lost in that other world. Dr. Chun visited regularly, monitoring Mark's progress and conducting tests to understand the effects of his prolonged dream state. Her excitement about the scientific implications of Mark's experience was tempered by concern for his well-being. "His brain activity is unlike anything I've ever seen," she confided to Amelia one evening, after Mark had gone to bed. "It's as if he's operating on a different frequency than the rest of us. The potential for scientific breakthrough is enormous, but..." "But what?" Amelia pressed, sensing the doctor's hesitation. Dr. Chun sighed. "But I'm worried about the long-term effects on his psyche. The human mind isn't meant to experience what he's been through. We're in uncharted territory here." As the days turned into weeks, Mark slowly began to readjust. He started to engage more with the world around him, to find joy in the simple pleasures of life that he had once taken for granted. But Amelia could see that he was struggling with something deeper, a conflict that he couldn't quite articulate. One night, she found him sitting in their backyard, staring up at the stars with an intensity that alarmed her. "Mark?" she said softly, sitting down beside him. "What's wrong?" He was quiet for a long moment before responding. "I miss it, Amelia. The dream world, the freedom, the endless possibilities. Here, everything feels so constrained." Amelia felt a chill run down her spine. "But this is real, Mark. This is our life." He turned to her, his eyes filled with a mixture of love and longing. "I know, and I love you. I love our life, but I can't forget what I experienced there. The knowledge, the power. It's still inside me, calling to me." Amelia took his hand, squeezing it tightly. "We'll figure this out together, Mark. Promise. We'll find a way to use what you've learned, to make a difference in this world." As they sat there under the stars, Amelia realized that their journey was far from over. They had escaped the dream world, but its effects lingered, threatening to unravel the fabric of their reality. Little did they know that forces beyond their understanding were already in motion, drawn by the ripples of their extraordinary experience. The boundary between dreams and reality had been breached, and the consequences were only beginning to unfold. As weeks turned into months, Mark struggled to balance his experiences in the dream world with his life in reality became increasingly apparent. While he had made significant progress in readjusting to daily life, there was an undeniable change in him. His work at the university took on a new intensity, his lectures filled with insights and theories that both excited and bewildered his colleagues. Amelia watched with a mixture of pride and concern as Mark's reputation in the scientific community grew. His papers on consciousness and the nature of reality were generating buzz in academic circles, drawing attention from researchers around the world. But with the growing acclaim came unwanted attention. Strange emails began to arrive, asking about Mark's research in cryptic terms. Amelia noticed unfamiliar cars parked on their street, watching their house. The sense of being observed became a constant presence in their lives. One evening, as they were preparing dinner, the doorbell rang. Amelia opened the door to find two men in dark suits standing on their porch. "Dr. and Mrs. Thornton?" one of them asked, his voice devoid of emotion. "We're from the National Security Agency. We'd like to speak with you about Dr. Thornton's recent work." Amelia felt her heart rate quicken. She called for Mark, who appeared beside her, his face a mask of calm determination. "Gentlemen," he said, "I think you'd better come in." What followed was a tense conversation in their living room. The agents, while polite, made it clear that Mark's research had attracted attention at the highest levels of government. They spoke of national security implications, of the potential for weaponizing dream technology. "We're offering you a chance to continue your work with full government backing," one of the agents said. "State-of-the-art facilities, unlimited funding. All we ask is your full cooperation and discretion." Mark listened silently, his expression unreadable. Amelia, however, felt a growing sense of dread. She could see the temptation in Mark's eyes, the allure of being able to delve deeper into the mysteries he had encountered. "We'll need time to consider your offer," Mark finally said, his voice steady. After the agents left, an uneasy silence fell over the house. Amelia turned to Mark, her voice trembling slightly. "You're not really considering this, are you?" Mark ran a hand through his hair, his internal conflict evident. "Amelia, you don't understand. The potential for what we discovered. It could change everything. The way we understand consciousness, reality itself." "But at what cost, Mark?" Amelia pleaded. "You've seen what this knowledge can do, how it can consume you. And now the government wants to use it as a weapon." Their argument was interrupted by a soft knock at the back door. They turned to see Dr. Chun standing there, her face pale with worry. "We have a problem," she said as they let her in. "I've been monitoring the dream realm, and something's changed. The barrier between our world and that one, it's weakening." As Dr. Chun explained her findings, Amelia felt a chill run down her spine. The experiments they had conducted, Mark's prolonged stay in the dream world, and their journey to bring him back, all of it had caused a ripple effect they couldn't have anticipated. "If we don't find a way to stabilize the barrier," Dr. Chun concluded, "the consequences could be catastrophic. Reality as we know it could unravel." Mark's eyes blazed with a mixture of excitement and fear. "Then we have no choice. We have to go back in." Amelia looked between Mark and Dr. Chun, realizing that they stood at a crossroads. The fate of not just their own lives, but potentially the entire world, hung in the balance. As the weight of their situation settled over them, Amelia made a decision. Whatever came next, whatever dangers they faced, she would stand by Mark's side. Together, they would face the unknown and fight to protect the boundary between dreams and reality. Little did they know that their greatest challenge still lay ahead, waiting for them in the depths of the dream world they thought they had left behind. The preparation for their return to the dream world was fraught with tension. Dr. Chun worked tirelessly to modify her equipment, aiming to give them more control and stability in the dream realm. Mark threw himself into the task with an intensity that both impressed and worried Amelia. She could see the pull of that other world growing stronger in him with each passing day. As for Amelia, she struggled with her own fears and doubts. The memory of nearly losing Mark to the dream world haunted her, but she knew she couldn't let him face this challenge alone. On the night of their planned journey, they gathered in Dr. Chen's lab. The room hummed with the energy of advanced equipment, screens displaying complex data streams that Amelia could barely comprehend. "Remember," Dr. Chen said as she prepared the modified Dream Tea, "your goal is to locate the source of the instability and seal it. Under no circumstances should you attempt to alter the fundamental nature of the dream realm. The consequences could be catastrophic. Mark nodded, his eyes gleaming with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. Amelia took his hand, squeezing it tightly. "We do this together," she said firmly. "Promise me you won't let go." Mark turned to her, his expression softening. "I promise, Amelia. No matter what happens, we face it as one." As they drank the tea and settled back onto the specially prepared beds, Amelia felt the familiar sensation of falling. But this time it was different. The descent into the dream world felt more controlled, more purposeful. They found themselves standing on what appeared to be a vast, translucent platform suspended in an endless void. Streams of energy flowed all around them, pulsing with vibrant colors. "The fabric of the dream world," Mark whispered in awe. "I can see it now, understand it in a way I never could before." Amelia looked around, trying to orient herself in this alien landscape. "How do we find the source of the instability?" As if in response to her question, a distant rumbling shook the platform. In the distance, they could see a swirling vortex of chaotic energy, growing larger by the moment. "There," Mark said, pointing. "That's where the barrier is weakening." They began to move towards the vortex, the platform beneath their feet shifting and reforming with each step. As they drew closer, Amelia could feel the pull of the chaos, a tempting whisper promising unlimited power and knowledge. Suddenly, a figure materialized before them, blocking their path. Amelia gasped as she recognized the shadow version of Mark they had encountered before. "You shouldn't have come back," the shadow Mark said, his voice echoing strangely. "This world is not meant for you." Mark stepped forward, his jaw set with determination. "We're here to fix the damage we caused, to stabilize the barrier between worlds." The shadow Mark laughed, a sound that sent chills down Amelia's spine. "Fix? You can't fix this. The only way forward is to embrace it, to let the worlds merge and evolve into something new, something greater." Amelia could feel Mark hesitating, the allure of the shadow's words evident in his eyes. She tightened her grip on his hand, reminding him of his promise. "No," Mark said finally, his voice firm. "That's not why we're here. We need to restore balance, not destroy it." The shadow Mark's face contorted with anger. "Then you leave me no choice." With a wave of his hand, the world around them began to shift and warp. The platform beneath their feet crumbled, and Amelia felt herself falling. She clung to Mark's hand desperately as they plummeted through layers of dream and memory. They landed hard in a place that looked like a twisted version of their own world. Familiar buildings were distorted, stretching impossibly into a sky filled with multiple suns. People walked the streets, but their faces were blank, featureless. "He's trying to confuse us," Mark said, helping Amelia to her feet, "to make us lose our way." Amelia looked around, trying to get her bearings. "How do we get back? How do we find the vortex again?" Mark closed his eyes, concentrating. "We need to focus on our purpose, on our connection to each other and to our real world. That's our anchor." As they stood there, hand in hand, focusing on their shared memories and their determination to save their world, the chaotic landscape around them began to fade. The vortex reappeared in the distance, larger and more menacing than before. They pressed on, fighting against the pull of the dream world's chaotic energy. As they neared the vortex, Amelia could see fractures in the very fabric of reality, glimpses of other worlds bleeding through. "We need to seal it," Mark shouted over the roar of the vortex. "But I don't know how." Amelia looked at their clasped hands, an idea forming. "Our connection, Mark. It's what brought you back before. Maybe it's the key to fixing this too." Understanding dawned in Mark's eyes. Together, they reached out towards the vortex, focusing all their will, all their love, on the idea of healing the rift between worlds. A blinding light engulfed them, and Amelia felt a surge of energy unlike anything she had ever experienced. For a moment, she could see everything, all possible worlds, all potential realities, stretched out before her. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. The vortex collapsed in on itself, the fractures in reality sealing shut. The dream world around them stabilized, taking on a more peaceful aspect. As the light faded, Amelia found herself back in Dr. Chen's lab, gasping for breath. Beside her, Mark stirred, his eyes opening slowly. Dr. Chen rushed over, her face a mixture of concern and excitement. "You did it," she said, checking their vital signs. "The readings, they've stabilized. The barrier between worlds is healing." Amelia turned to Mark, searching his face. "Are you okay? Are you? Mark smiled, squeezing her hand. "I'm here, Amelia, really here, and I'm not going anywhere." Amelia felt tears of relief spring to her eyes as she embraced her husband. The ordeal they had just been through felt like a lifetime, but they had emerged stronger, their bond deeper than ever before. As they recovered over the next few days, Mark and Amelia worked with Dr. Chen to analyze the data from their experience. The implications were staggering. They had not only stabilized the barrier between worlds, but had gained insights into the very nature of reality itself. "We have a responsibility," Mark said one evening as they sat in their backyard, looking up at the stars. "To use what we've learned, but to do it carefully, ethically." Amelia nodded, understanding the weight of his words. "No more secret experiments, no government involvement. We do this on our terms, for the betterment of humanity." In the months that followed, Mark and Amelia, with Dr. Chen's help, began to publish their findings, carefully omitting the more dangerous aspects of their discoveries. Their work revolutionized fields from neuroscience to physics, opening up new avenues of research and understanding. But more importantly, their experience had changed them on a fundamental level. They approached life with a new appreciation for the wonders of everyday reality, never taking a single moment for granted. As they lay in bed one night, Amelia turned to Mark, a question on her lips. "Do you ever miss it? The dream world, I mean." Mark was quiet for a moment before answering. "Sometimes," he admitted. "The freedom, the possibilities. But then I look at you, at our life together, and I realize that this right here, right now, is the greatest adventure of all." Amelia smiled, snuggling closer to him. They had faced the unknown together, had peered beyond the veil of reality itself. And in the end, they had chosen this world, this life, with all its limitations and boundless potential. As they drifted off to sleep, Amelia knew that whatever dreams might come, they would face them together, anchored by their love and their shared journey through the extraordinary. Thank you very much for listening to this story. Comment below what you thought of the ending and from which city you're listening to us. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more, click on the next story that's appearing on your screen now. Leave your like and subscribe to our channel so we can build a huge community that shares inspiring stories together. See you soon.